How fancy is too fancy for you? What is going on, guys? Carter here with Edged Mindset. We're taking a look at the Buckhorn from Karbon blades. Today we're doing a full review, full look at this knife. I did an unboxing a while back, and I was actually pretty impressed with this knife. There was a few things I didn't absolutely love, but by and large, I really like this knife. Now, some of the feedback I got on that unboxing, though, of course, as expected, was that this was a bit much for some people, and I totally get that. There is a lot going on with this thing visually that might not jive with you. It might be just a little bit too fancy. So what I want to do is talk about this knife, point out the things that I like, the reasons why I really, really like this knife, and see if maybe you can connect with some of those reasons and see what you think about it, you know. And as always, thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting, all those things. I really appreciate it. If you're not subscribed, please do so. Like the video, really helps me out, keeps me going, keeps me making these videos. Couldn't do it without you, wouldn't want to anyways. So yeah, let's kick it off. Let's do some specs, right? Let's do the boring part of the video, get it out of the way so we can talk about the juicy stuff, because there's some cool things on this knife that I really want to point out. One of which I pointed out in a short, but I want to make sure that it's included in the main video here. So almost a 4-inch blade, 3 3/4, depending on where you measure it from. If you kind of go to the thumb stud there, it's 3 3/4. If you go all the way to here, it is almost 4 inches. Overall length is 8 3/4. So this is a large knife, which is impressive. Very impressive for this day and age. So many knives are getting smaller and smaller. I'm hoping we're seeing a trend back into larger knives, because as the famous and as Lynn Thompson, who's still alive, not late and great, always said, a large knife can do everything a small knife can do, but a small knife cannot do everything a large knife can do. So 4.4 ounces, very lightweight for its size, which is one of the very impressive things with this knife. Now, it's lightweight, but it comes at a cost, and that cost is it's very thin. Really thin handle. So we'll talk about that here in a minute. Steel on this blade is S35VN, which is interesting. I really expected M390. Usually knives like this just kind of come with M390. This one is S35VN, which is kind of cool. Very good steel, tried and true, very nice, but not what I would have expected. High flat grind on this thing, relatively high flat grind on this thing comes to a point. And as I mentioned in the unboxing, I really like the consistency of the thinness behind the edge. So they've done a good job matching the distal taper, so the thickness from the stock up here to how thick it gets at the tip, matching that with the taper this way so that it's consistently thin behind the edge, as opposed to getting super thick up here, which happens a lot on knives when they don't really take that into account. You know, they'll taper it this way, but they don't taper it enough this way, so then it gets really thick, and they match the sharpening bevel so that it looks consistent, but what it does is it makes the angle really obtuse at the front here. It just doesn't cut very well. So good job there. We've got a polished bead blast finish on here. We have a nice swedge up top. Looks really nice, kind of reminiscent of like a dagger. I'm guessing this would be kind of a modified drop point, because I don't think this is a flat back. Close, but not quite. So it does drop down, and then it's got this curve at the tip here, which is interesting. So it doesn't lead to a super sharp tip. So that means you are going to get a good amount of strength on that tip without making it overly thick, which once again means you're going to get some pretty good cutting action up at the tip here. So really good design there. I wouldn't expect anything less, because this was designed by Ken Onion. Ken Onion has been a knife designer, knife maker for decades and decades and decades. You might know him from a lot of his ZT collaborations in the mid-2000s. But he's been making knives long before then, and has continued to do so, along with lots of collaborations with very large makers. So he's proficient. He knows what he's doing. Of course, anybody can make an odd design here or there, but he knows what he is doing. We've got thumb studs. We've got a flipper. I absolutely love that. Dual deployment or triple deployment, depending on how you want to classify it, and they work really well. The action on this thing is fantastic. The blade just flies out. Sorry I'm turning it over like that. I'm really close to my background, and I don't want to hit the blade on the ground, because that would look dumb. Flipper action is astounding. Super snappy. Really snappy. This thing flies open. The detent is tuned really, really well. You can see how high this flipper is, meaning you're going to get a lot of leverage over that pivot there. Going to get tons of flipping action. I really like these studs, how they are tapered down like that with texture on them. They just work really, really nice, and they're not overly aggressively cumbersome on your finger, right? Very comfortable to flick this thing. You're not hitting like some sharp edge from kind of, let me see if I've got an example here. You know, well, these ones are nice and tapered, but I really don't like the ones that just are flat up top. I think they look lame and they don't feel that good, but this one is kind of custom thumb studs right there, which is really nice. And before I forget, I do want to talk about the lockup. So there is a stop pin right here, and that is what is used in the closed position. It's also what's used in the open position. You can see it's nice and radiused right there to fully wrap around that stop pin, but also the thumb studs make contact with the steel as well, or the titanium as well. So you have triple points of contact, which is an extremely robust lockup system. More robust than you would expect from a knife like this. Not only does it mean you can have an extreme amount of force going this way without affecting lockup or anything like that, but it also means you've got more lateral stability because of these thumb studs making contact with these scales here. So the ability of the blade to wiggle this way is impeded because it's got resistance, how it's making contact right there. Even if this pivot was loose a little bit, you wouldn't really get any movement because it's locked up so tightly like that. So very cool, very nice design choice right there. Now let's get to the part that people don't seem to like so much, and that is all of the fancy work here. You've got 3D cubes kind of milled up here, and like I mentioned in the unboxing, this is actual texture. It's not just like a surface lasering. You can feel this. It's got a little bit of grip to it. You've also got this pinstriping running up and down right here. You've got decorative holes. You can see that it's going for kind of a mirror thing where both sides are very, very similar. You've got the cubes on the pocket clip here, which is milled titanium, by the way. Also works very, very well. A little bit on the stiff side, though. I haven't ran into any issues getting it in and out of pocket, mainly because it's nice and smooth underneath, and you've got a good amount of lift to get under, but it is quite stiff. So if you wear really thick jeans or something like that, could be a bit of an issue. You might need to bend this out a tad. I do kind of wish they maybe thinned it out just a touch right there. Would have helped quite a bit. We've got your lock bar insert, all your normal features, running on bearings, all that good stuff. Now, when I got this was gold, right? That's what it comes as, gold. It's supposed to look like a 12 gauge shotgun casing or 410 shotgun casing. I removed the anodization with acid to kind of give it this chalky kind of matte dark gray finish, and then I hand polished the actual pivot here to kind of provide some contrast. I think it looks better. Most people agreed that it looks better. Some people didn't like it though. Some people thought that the gold kind of gave it a little panache, a little touch of color. I get that. I think I just have something against gold. I just don't like gold. So that's more of a personal preference. If you get this knife and you love the gold, awesome, man. That's how Ken Onion designed it. I also mentioned a little bit of the dichotomy with this knife, right? To have, I mean, I guess what you could call hunting paraphernalia, right? Something that speaks to hunting culture, 12 gauge shotgun shell, but on a knife that is very thin and elegant and organic and flowy and has a lot of like textures on it, right? Essentially a fancy boy knife, but with the 12 gauge shotgun shell on it. Very interesting choice from Ken Onion. It makes me wonder, like, is that a conscious decision from him to say, I like the juxtaposition of those two arguably opposing aesthetics? Or did he just go with his gut and he's like, this is how I think knives should look, and I like shotgun shells, so we're going to combine the two. I don't know, but it is very interesting. It's a cool kind of unique touch on there. Backspacer. Let's talk about this backspacer. Full titanium, runs up about 3/4 of the knife. Looks really nice. You've got a huge lanyard hole, arguably too big of a lanyard hole right there. Really, really big. But the cool thing about this backspacer, and I did a short on this, actually disassembling, but you can't just take these scales apart. So if you take out these screws, which go into this backspacer on each side, you can't pull these, and the pivot, of course, you can't pull these scales apart because it actually has two screws that are screwed on the inside to each side of the scales here. And then those screws key into this backspacer. So this backspacer is actually holding the scales together. So that means you could remove these screws right here and remove that pivot, And unless you slide this backspacer out, it's going to hold together. And I think that is amazing, because that basically means, like in terms of holding this knife together, these screws are just playing a small part in holding this thing together. These two screws are another anchor point without having to have anything visual on the outside here. So very, very cool very cool touch on the design of this knife that took me a minute to figure out when I was disassembling this thing to try to clean up that pivot there, change the color of that pivot. So very, very cool. Oh, let's see. You can see right in there. So you can see those screws. They slide into grooves on the inside of that backspacer there. And then it also has a pin up here. So the backspacer isn't even going to fall out, right? You can pivot it out, and then you've got to pull apart the scales, and that's how you can get this thing apart. So a little tip there if you're taking it apart. So overall, I think this is fantastic. It's like a kind of a gentleman's folder, but it's large. It's got a little bit of tactical flair to it. Very capable for EDC. All of this milling here is mostly decorative. It does provide a little bit of texture to it. The only things that I can really say negative about this knife objectively is the relief cutout here is a little tight. I mentioned that on the unboxing video. It's, it's just that. It's a little close together. These edges are a little thin. It's just not my preference. However, I don't know what you would do about it without drastically changing the design, right? Because it's like that because of how this tapers in, swells out, tapers in. There's not a whole lot you could really do to fix that, I don't think. Without removing some of this chamfering and moving it to the inside. No actual issues. I'm able to disengage every time I want to. It just doesn't feel as good, I guess, as I would like it to feel, so to speak. The only other detrimental thing that I can think of on this knife, other than the aesthetics of that pivot and the lock bar relief right there, is kind of just the overall thinness of it. If you don't like thin knives, then maybe you won't like this. It's very comfortable. Your fingers go into these swells right here. This kind of fits into the meat of your hand. However, if you've got larger hands, it does feel a little less substantial than you would think it would be. Now, that being said, it also reduces the weight of the overall knife. So, it's all give and take. You could have a more substantial and robust handle, but then you're going to throw extra weight on there because there's going to be more titanium that you're dealing with. The price point on this thing is crazy. $275, brand new from a retailer. And I know I'm not saying that's a small amount of money. That's a large amount of money. I'm just saying, compared to its peers, right? Compared to other overseas made knives, you're not going to get this amount of work. You're not going to get this amount of milling and details. You're not going to get a design of this high of a caliber as Ken Onion for that price from anybody else. Now, you may say, I don't want any of this stuff, and that's fair, and that's fine. But I'm just saying, compared apples to knives in its peer group, you're just not going to find anything else at this price point that matches everything this knife has to offer. And as I mentioned in my unboxing, I have a feeling this is somewhat of a, they're probably not making much money on this knife. This is their first offering. They're trying to make some waves, make a splash, make a name for themselves. So that's probably why the price point is lower than what you would expect, because it's artificially lower. It's a tactic that businesses use, right? You're new on the block. You give away your product for free or near free to try to get some exposure, get people interested, and get other people buying your product. But we'll see what the other offerings from Karbon Blades has to offer. But for now, this one is really, really cool. I find myself coming back to this one more than a lot of the knives that I've received recently. Something about it I just really, really like. The action's on point. It just looks really, really cool. It's lightweight, it's thin, it's easy to carry, but it has a very long blade. Look how long that blade is. Really nice. All right, guys, what do you think of this knife? The Ken Onion Buckhorn Karbon Blades made by K2O. Comment down below your opinions, thoughts, and once again, appreciate all you guys. Take care.